Now, love or hate what the sequel trilogy has been thus far, I'd argue that, as of yet, it's failed to do anything truly memorable and or shocking with any of its new characters. It's failed to give us one of those moments that Star Wars fans would and could talk about forever, other than maybe Kylo Ren murdering his father, which wasn't really that big of a shock considering most of us knew Harrison Ford would only ever do one more Star Wars film, and as soon as Leia asked him to confront their son, well, his fate was pretty much sealed. And so, as I've talked about in other videos, my biggest fear right now for Episode 9 is that they'll play it way too safe and give us a bland and or predictable ending to the greatest film saga in history. One where Rey stands triumphant because she's Rey, and where she ends up stopping and possibly redeeming Kylo Ren, while also putting an end to Palpatine once and for all this time. Then it'll be heavily implied that Rey will go on to rebuild the Jedi Order, or start something new just like it. You know, an ending radically different from the one Return of the Jedi gave us, where Luke saves and redeems his father, and Palpatine is stopped once and for all, or so we thought. And then it's heavily implied Luke will go on to rebuild the Jedi Order. And if that's anything like the ending we get, or should I say get again, if it doesn't melt our minds as Kevin Smith was told it would by those making the movie, oddly enough, then it will always feel like this trilogy was made, not because there was a great story yet to be told about the Skywalkers, but only because there was money still to be made off of their name. And yes, as I've said before, I certainly understand how this works, that Disney and Lucasfilm need to make money in order to keep making Star Wars films. And when the films are good, it's an arrangement any fan is perfectly fine with. We give them our money, and we get good, well thought out films in return. In other words, everyone gets exactly what they want. And so in this video, I want to discuss Rey, the character Disney and Lucasfilm essentially bet everything on. The new character we fans are supposed to love and be rooting for, so that we keep watching Star Wars and buying the merchandise in order for this happy little symbiotic relationship between fans and Lucasfilm to truly work. I'm going to talk about our original hopes for the character, what she then became, what she could have become, and what could yet be done with her in the final part of this trilogy to maybe make her a memorable character. Which I know gets an eye roll from some people out there because they feel it's impossible to even salvage this character at this point, much less make her memorable. And it's hard to believe that it was just 4 years ago, before The Force Awakens came out, that there was nothing but hope and excitement around this character, back when the only argument around her was if she'd eventually be the daughter of Han and Leia, or maybe the daughter of Luke and some new character, or maybe even Mara Jade. Because back then, again, before The Force Awakens ever came out, no one was really considering the possibility that she might be nobody, that the new main protagonist of the final trilogy of the Skywalker saga might be free from any of its great lineages, especially the Skywalkers. I mean, how could the Skywalker saga end with a story about a character who wasn't a Skywalker? And even after The Force Awakens came out and seemed to purposely keep her parentage a secret in order to offer some big, shocking reveal in the next movie, the type of moment I'd again argue the sequel trilogy has been lacking, the debate was once more, what great Star Wars lineage is she from? Could she be a Kenobi, which would offer an interesting twist where a Skywalker, Luke this time, would now train a Kenobi. It'd be a flip of the script from the prequel trilogy, and even to some extent the original trilogy where Obi-Wan does briefly train Luke. Or was she perhaps still going to be the daughter of Han and Leia, or maybe Luke, and many would argue that's exactly where all the evidence was pointing, right at Luke Skywalker. Or what if they went a more shocking route and made her the granddaughter or a creation of Palpatine, which offers yet another interesting dynamic to play around with, one where Luke has to train a Palpatine to save a Skywalker, that being Ben Solo, of course. And quite frankly, no matter which of these origin stories they went with, it felt like there was a good story to be had there, and that people would have ended up loving and rooting for this character. But as some idiot suggested in a theory video about a year before The Last Jedi came out, a theory video that launched his YouTube career, ironically enough, what if Rey ended up being a nobody? What if her parents were irrelevant? What if the message of this trilogy was a very Disney-like one, where we're basically told that anybody can be special? And in hindsight, I wish I would have been dead wrong with my theory, because despite the narrative or the reason some want to give for the dislike around Rey, it has nothing to do with her gender and everything to do with a character taking center stage in a story that doesn't feel like it belongs to her. And not only that, but she seems stronger than any other character we've seen in the story before. And so what tends to be the biggest complaint about Rey is how easily almost everything comes to her, that she seems to be extremely proficient with the Force, despite any real training, short of Luke's 3 lessons in The Last Jedi, which took place over the course of a day or two and were about why she shouldn't become a Jedi. Not that she needs training, because we've seen that she can just close her eyes, let the Force in, and easily best and make look silly Kylo Ren, a well-trained Force user, making it appear as if he was the one using a lightsaber for the first time and not her. And yeah, I certainly realized that Kylo was wounded and he wasn't trying to kill her, he was intrigued by her and was trying to gain an apprentice. But once she closed her eyes and let the Force in, it was game over for Kylo Ren. It wouldn't have mattered if he was at full strength and fully intent on killing her. He had no chance against, well, whatever Rey had just done or become. Not to mention, according to the novelization of The Last Jedi, while Kylo Ren was interrogating or probing her mind, as seen in The Force Awakens, she was in turn downloading all of his training, or making it feel as if his training had been her own, as the book basically puts it. And yes, that really is, as it stands right now, the official canon explanation as to why Rey can use the Force so well. In other words, to sum it up very quickly, right now Rey's story is this. One day the Force just awoke in her, and she suddenly gained tremendous raw power, so much so that Luke, who has seen unlimited power in his day, was apparently afraid when he sees what she can do. And soon after getting this power, and before she even realizes she has it or what it is, and do keep in mind she tells Luke that the Force is for lifting rocks basically, she learns how to use it in mere moments by taking someone else's training directly and unfiltered from their twisted mind, someone who's been trained in the ways of the dark side. And I don't know about you, but to me that sounds like the ultimate recipe for falling to the dark side. It sounds like the quick and easy path that Yoda warned Luke about. Yet at the same time, it could have made for a very, very interesting character if used right. One who is growing in power almost exponentially and has no idea how to handle all of it. Which leads us to what could have been done with Rey if it was more about story and less about trying so damn hard to make the perfect iconic character. And that's simply to end The Last Jedi with Rey taking Kylo's hand and joining him on the dark side. Yeah, I still have a lot of issues with the movie overall, but I would respect the gamble they took with their new character. I'd appreciate them doing the last thing so many would have ever expected them to do with Rey, a character that some feel is little more than just another Disney princess. It would also have been great to see her make the opposite choice that Luke made when also presented with an open-handed invitation to the dark side. Oh, and I'd also be looking forward to see what happens next in Episode 9. But, of course, it didn't go down that way. They missed their chance at one of those memorable moments I talked about at the start, the type of twist that fans would have been talking about and discussing forever. And instead, she turned down Kylo Ren easily enough, played lightsaber tug-of-war with him for a few seconds, before ultimately getting away and saving what was left of the Resistance. And when the movie ended, she was more or less in the exact same place she was when it had begun. And the thing is, despite there certainly being some complaints about Rey after The Force Awakens, most fans who had issues with her were willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. They were holding out hope and waiting until after Episode 8 to make a more definitive judgment about the character. A lot of them were rooting not so much for her going into The Last Jedi, but rooting for her to fail, and fail miserably, so that they could start to cheer for her, so that they could be happy when she ultimately bounces back in the last movie of the trilogy and gets some type of victory. Basically, they just wanted to see her take a few lumps, or to maybe even lose a hand, which is like a rite of passage for Star Wars heroes in their second movie. Instead, the scar left on Rey was an emotional one, or so we are to believe. One formed after she failed to save the guy who, days prior in the story, murdered his own father, split open the back of her best friend Finn with a lightsaber, and was a leader in a regime that murdered billions upon billions of people in the Hosnian system. Not to mention all the things he'd personally done to her. In other words, some fans feel not being able to save this terrible person she'd met and was tortured by just days prior in the story is not a character-defining nor a trilogy-defining moment. However, I think taking Kylo Ren's hand would have been both, but it would have also meant making Rey something other than a perfect Disney princess. And I personally think the story of The Last Jedi is far, far more interesting if it's all about Rey's slide to darkness and Luke's return to the light. No, they didn't need to start Luke quite as low as they did, but if the loss of Ben Solo had sent Luke to find the First Jedi Temple out of desperation because he needed to save his nephew, and he didn't find answers when he got there and he didn't know what to do next, well, I'm far more accepting of that version of Luke than I am of the one who gives up and wants to die alone. And if you truly want the theme of the movie to be about learning from failure, then Rey needed to fail harder than she did. It should have been heavily implied that going down into that cave and asking the dark side to show her who her parents are was all a trap to lure her to the dark side. As Luke basically tried to tell her, it's offering something you want but if you take it, the price will be severe. And wouldn't it have made more sense if Rey had seen Kylo in that mirror when she asks who her parents are, not herself, because he's the one who can tell her all about them. This even ties back to Kylo wanting to know what girl in The Force Awakens when he hears about some girl on Jakku that's helped Finn and BB-8 escape, implying that Kylo suspects all along who Rey is and knows some type of deeper, darker secret about her. I mean, isn't it a more interesting and engaging story if we the audience can see, but Rey can't, that she's falling to the dark side and it's trying to send her to Kylo Ren at all costs because, as we'll ultimately see, it knows she'll take his offer and find belonging with him and with the dark side? Such a story could have started to generate some real sympathy for her and make us start to care and fear for her as we see her making mistake after mistake and slipping further and further away from the light. All the while, Luke is coming to the realization that his fear to train her, and maybe his fear to truly train Ben, is the reason why he's failing and why the dark side is winning. He didn't listen to Yoda, he didn't pass on what he learned, and now they're still down to just one last Jedi. And no, I'm not necessarily saying that's the best story ever either, but to me at least, and you're of course free to disagree, it takes the foundation of The Last Jedi and tells a story that turns Rey from a perfect two-dimensional character who wins in the end into a flawed three-dimensional character who loses in the end and whose fate seems uncertain. Because the thing is, she's not a Skywalker, right? This doesn't exactly turn out to be her story per se, and maybe her part in the grand scheme of things is to be the reason Kylo Ren will come back to the light. But she can't ultimately be saved. It's an unexpected and bittersweet ending that no one would have ever seen coming when it all started. Instead, I think damn near everyone expects Rey to win and or somehow save the day in the end, and that what's going to melt our minds is not the actual story, but some big reveal saved for the bitter end about Rey that, at best, will indeed be interesting and finally be a memorable moment in this trilogy, but at worst could be seen as a sad attempt to give fans a reason to truly find her story and the character herself interesting at the bitter end. And look, I really, really hope they do something interesting with her that just blows us all away. I hope they make her the granddaughter or a creation of Palpatine, and she makes some type of crazy choice at the end of the movie, and it's Kylo Ren that needs to be the one who stops her. Just something completely unexpected and out there, please. I mean, at this point, why not go all in on something like that? Why not throw caution to the wind and prove to us it's more about telling a great story than it is trying to make a perfect, iconic character? Or, at the very least, start Episode 9 out with Rey at a low point or full of self-doubt, that suddenly everyone's been expecting her to be a leader and a hero, and she doesn't know how to handle all that. After all, she grew up alone on a harsh desert planet where taking care of herself, and just trying to survive each and every day, was likely not only her top priority, but pretty much her only priority. Not to mention, anyone too kind and generous on such a world likely got taken advantage of at every turn and repeatedly until they formed a hard outer shell and stopped trusting anyone. But Rey never seemed to form such a shell, and she trusts absolutely everyone she comes across, even Kylo Ren. And you can certainly argue that has been her flaw in this trilogy, that she's too trusting. And if that's the argument you want to make, then starting out this next movie with her not trusting people and running from responsibility would actually make a lot of sense. And so, almost to mirror Luke's story in a way, it'd be interesting if she sort of broke and ran away from everything, and when Episode 9 starts, it will be her who has vanished this time. And the first third of the movie would be spent on finding her, and it would take a pep talk from Luke and maybe Finn finding her to get her back into the fight to confront Kylo Ren and stop some crazy plan he's concocted. No, it's not the most original or complex story of all time, especially on the surface, but it could be when it ends with Rey learning she's a Palpatine and siding with him. Now that would be an ending that truly melts my mind. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me how you feel about Rey and what you think her story should look like in Episode 9. Do you think she's simply going to win again in the end, or will there be some sort of truly shocking twist? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.